And now I'm sharing my screen. Oh, before that, I wanted to show you a little demonstration that I did in acrylic. It's just a little quick time-lapse 30-second video of this scene. So it starts with an undertone. There are shapes here, but it's just because I did the undertone on top of another painting. So these shapes are not shapes that I will follow at all. So this is considered like an undertone. And this demonstration is an acrylic demonstration, but I thought that I would show you anyway. So first I do all of the outline of the shapes. And then after that, I paint the sky and I paint the water. Then the trees on the left that are very dark. And then then the mountain in the back, the reflection, and the marshes in the front coming forward. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So if you ever want to watch this demonstration or any other demonstration that I've done so far, you could easily go to my website. I have a section under classes that is called class recordings, and there's a whole bunch of recordings there. And with that, I just realized that I forgot to mute you guys. Not very good with this. So I'm going to do mute all. And then you can unmute yourself if you need to ask a question. All right, so this was the demonstration. Now I'm going to show you the little slideshow that I prepared for this class. So it's a fall landscape in phases. And so in black and white, you can see, so this is not the actual drawing that I did. It's actually the black and white watercolor version. So I took a photo of my watercolor and I changed it in black and white. So here on the left is a simple version of the watercolor. So if you're a beginner, you've never done any kind of watercoloring before, I would suggest that when you draw, that you draw this version, which is quite simple. It's got the water here on the right at the bottom. And then on the left, there's a grouping of trees. And in the background is the mountains, and then above is the sky. So that's fairly simple. And if you draw this, and then I'm not asking you to draw right now, I'm just showing you. And then when it's time to do the watercoloring, it'll be a simple, you'll have very simple zones to paint. Now, if you're a little bit more adventurous and would like to go a little bit more, like in between, then you can do this version, which is the top right version. So if I go like this, you can probably see it a little bit better. Like this. Yes. So in this version, it's a slightly larger version. There's a grouping of trees also on the right-hand side, and there's a much bigger body of water. But it's the same grouping on trees on the left and same mountains in the back, except it's just longer and there's more of the sky. In this version, you can see in the sky, there's some cloud formations. So it's a little bit more complex. And then if you want to go for, oh yeah, and in this grouping of trees, there's also some pine trees in front of the grouping of trees. And then if you want to go a little bit more complex, then you could do this version, which is the same as above, except the portion of the water that is at the very bottom has a reflection of these trees as well. And this portion here is a reflection of the mountains in the back. So it just gives you a little bit more of a challenge. So if I go back to the normal size, yes, I'm going to move on to show you the different steps of painting this. And the steps that I have here are for the most complex version of the drawing. So first I did the sky and the water pretty much with the same very pale blue. And I did a solid yellow ochre color here on this reflection of the water, this portion of the water that would become reflection. And I painted the dark grouping of trees on this side. Before I started, I did an outline of the different zones, you know, with my pencil on the watercolor paper. Then at this step, I simply added the purple mountain in the background, which I then realized that this purple didn't work. But anyway, this is what I did in this step. In the step over here, I added a nice bright yellow orange on this whole section, including the trees, the grouping of trees that are on the right. And when I did this, I decided to change a little bit this portion, by increasing the height of the trees on this side. And then in the other section, this section, that's when I added this grouping of trees as one big zone without doing the detail of the pine trees in front. And that's when I painted the reflection. So you can see there's a certain level of complexity to this reflection. So if you've never done watercolor before, this may be a little bit too advanced. But for some of you who've done watercolor before, that might be a fun thing to do. Now, note how in this very first phase, we can see that the water is blue. And when we get to this phase, the water looks to be white, although it's still the same blue as here. The reason for this is because now this blue section is actually fighting against everything else that's around it, and none of it is white. So that's why it appears to be so light. So when painting, that's an important thing to remember. When painting, it's important to cover with at least an initial color everything without leaving any white, to be able to see if, how the colors react to one another. All right, I'm going to go to the next page. Now, in this page, you can see that here in the background, I actually changed the color of this purple mountain to make it more of a brownish green. So simply what I did is I used some of the green with a lot of water, and I just went over the purple, and it gave me this nice brown color. And I also went over this section of the yellow trees by adding more orange on top. And at the same time, I changed a little bit the line, I raised it. Now, the other thing that I added is I added these pine trees here. And as I added these pine trees, I added their reflection in the water. On the next phase, this phase, I realized that this grouping of trees is way too turquoise. So because it's so turquoise, it's not very harmonious with the rest of everything, and it certainly doesn't match the reflection. So I went on top of it with another layer, another glaze of the green, and now it becomes more harmonious with everything else. The other thing that I did is I repainted the sky, this time going with a much darker blue at the top and keeping it still very light closer to the horizon. I also added some shapes of the trees here in the back. And to do this, I used my light green that I used to do this mountain. I used the same color to do these shapes. Then it's getting more and more subtle as to what I did. So from here to here, what did I do? Yeah, I know what I did. So I'm going to go a little closer. So if you look here, the water, this portion of the water still looks very light. So if I go like this, I should go like this. So here, the water is still very light. Here you can tell I went over it. It's very subtle, but I went over it with a little darker blue towards the front, a little bit more pink closer to the trees, so that it's shaped a little bit better. And it has a little bit more of an effect of depth. And what else did I do? I think that's all that I'm showing here, yeah. And then in the very last picture, it's very, very subtle. What I did is I added a little bit of the wind on the water. So I'm going to show you, because this is very important to show that this is a reflection. See right here, and right here, and right here, and also here. This is like when you look at water, you said, oh, it's like a mirror, but there's a little bit of a line because maybe there was a little bit of wind that happened there. So what I did is I lifted the color that I had put down, and these help read this section as water. And some people had asked me before, what is this white line here? Because this is the grouping of trees. This is its reflection here below. And this is where the water meets the shore. And sometimes what happens, it creates a little bit of foam. So that's what this reflects. That's why I left this here a much lighter color to reflect that this is where the water meets the shore. And
Claire?
Yes?
This is Susan. I have a question.
Yes.
The line that you're on right now, where the shore is,
Yes.
you know, that extends all the way over to the right-hand side of the, I mean, it goes all the way across the painting. What I'm having trouble with is the blue water, and then all of a sudden the reflection starts on a very straight line. It almost looks like a waterfall to me, which I know it's not. So I'm just, help me out here with perspective. What am I not seeing? Why does the reflection, why is there like 1.5 inches of blue and then the reflection starts? I'm not quite getting that.
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking, because I forgot to explain this portion. So what's happening is here in the front, there's no wind on the water. And that explains why we can see the reflection. Whereas in this section of the water in the middle where it's blue, there is a little bit of wind that comes behind this grouping of trees and comes sideways. And that creates a little ripple on the water. And this is why we cannot see the reflection over here or anywhere else. And that's why the water becomes very gray. So that's why here, this portion of the water does not show reflection, and it's gray because there is wind that comes across and creates a ripple on the water. And then here, in this portion of the water, there's no side wind. And so that's why it's like a mirror and we can see the reflection.
Okay, I see it now. I can see it now. I just couldn't figure it out. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for asking the question, because I'd forgotten to explain. And actually, the other thing that you said, which is very true, is that it looks like this is water, but then it looks like this is falling down. And the reason for that is because the reflection that I painted here is the exact same tone as these trees. So instead of coming forward, it looks like it's going down. And after I've completed this, I actually repainted this section to make the reflection in the water a little bit more toned down compared to the tone that I have in these trees. Because when you see a reflection in the water of an object, if the object is light, its reflection should be slightly darker in tone. And if an object is dark, like this grouping of trees, then its reflection in the water should be slightly lighter. Now, if it's a mid-tone, I don't know. But next time you're by a pond or a lake and there's no wind that day, it's like a mirror, try to observe. So maybe there is a birch tree, which the tree trunk will be very light when you look at it. Look at its reflection in the water. Is it lighter or darker? It will probably be slightly darker. And then if there is a pine tree and the pine tree is very, very dark, so look at its reflection in the water and you'll see it's slightly lighter than the actual object. So this is what I wanted to show you in terms of the different phases. And then the very last page shows the drawing that we're going to start with. So on the left, in this one, you can see a more simple version of the drawing. On the right-hand side, you can see the more complex drawing and see how I only drew this portion of the reflection. So this grouping of trees reflecting, this grouping of trees reflecting. I did not draw all of the other reflection here because this is something that we can have some fun with. And here I'm talking to the intermediate students. So back to, let's say I go back to this. What did I want to say? There was one more thing that I thought of. I forgot. It'll come back. So this here is this drawing. Now, this here would be, if I go back to the very first page, this, it would represent this drawing. Okay? So I will do, so this is where oh yeah. So for those who are a little unsure about this reflection here at the bottom, you could do the drawing like this. Oops. I shouldn't have moved it. Like this. So in this case, all of the water, we can imagine that all of the water has wind across it, except in this section here, where maybe it's calm, maybe it's hidden by this grouping of trees, and that's why there's no wind here, and the rest would be all gray water, without having to do the reflection at the bottom. So this would be like the intermediate drawing that you could do. But if you want to go all in, then you can do the drawing like this one at the bottom and do the full reflection of this portion. So, is there any questions on any of this? Or would you like to see any of the photos again before I start with a little demonstration? Okay. So for the demonstration, I will not be able to show you the photo from which I'm drawing and the drawing at the same time. And that's when I want to have my iPad set up so that you can see better. So I'm going to take a few minutes to set up for my demonstration. In the meantime, I'm going to leave the slideshow on this page. And if you want to start your drawing, you can do so, and you can choose the one that you want. Now, if you're a beginner, do not hesitate to take the larger drawing, this one here, to do a simple drawing, especially if you're a beginner at watercolor. If you're more advanced, then choose either this one at the top or this one at the bottom. All right. Meanwhile, I'm going to set up to do a demonstration. Can you hear me okay? And
Yes.
yes, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so this is what I'm going to demonstrate. Very simple lines, and if you want to do another drawing on a different page in your book at the same time as I'm doing my demonstration, feel free to do so, but I'm simply gonna go through the exercise of placing the lines in the right spots on the page. This is a 9x12 page, and after I've done this, what I do is then I go to something like this, where I tone the darkest darks, and then the mid-tone, and then the lightest light. So I'm going to take a brand new page of my book. Oh yeah, the other thing that I wanted to show you is that sometimes before I start a painting, what I like doing, I like to do a little thumbnail. So see, this is a very small little drawing. It's about maybe 3 by 4 inches. It's very small, but this is something that I like to do before I do a painting, because it can tell me if the composition is strong. And if the composition is strong in a small little thumbnail like this, then I know my painting has a chance to become a great painting. But if in black and white like this, if the composition is not strong in a small little thumbnail like this, then I can do another one, because this takes maybe 10 minutes to do. Then I can do another one to try to do a more solid composition before I attempt to do the actual painting. But in this case, we'll just do, and you can see lots of examples of this on this page. So I started with this one. I went, maybe I should simplify it. I went and did this one. And then I went and did this one here, which is the one that I decided to paint.
Claire,
Yes.
it looks like you have a grid. Did you actually draw a grid? Like, is there a full grid behind each drawing?
Yes, that is a very good question. So yes, in a case like this, and this is actually a class that I was teaching. So, but when I paint for myself, if I know that I'm gonna want to paint, let's say on a 9x12 or a 12x16 canvas, then I do a grid that has the same proportion as 9x12. So maybe I'll do a little thumbnail that will be maybe 3 inches by 4 inches, and I will do a grid that each part is 1/3 of the overall width. So if it's 3 inches, then each part would be 1 inch. If it's 4 inches, then it gets a little bit trickier, but it would be 4 inches, each part would be 1 inch and a third, and so on and so forth. And I like doing that because then I know that once I put it on the canvas, then it will be the same proportion, and I can follow my grid to place the object correctly on my canvas, because I will also first grid the canvas before I start my drawing. So I do that very often, especially when I have a complex scene or a scene that has a lot of depth, and I want to make sure that I put every step at the right place. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. That was an excellent question. But in this case, this is not the class that we're doing. We're going to do a drawing without doing the grid. So, fresh page, and like I said, feel free to do the drawing along with me. So first I'm going to demonstrate the complete drawing, and then if there is a need, I can demonstrate how to do the more simple drawing. All right, so let's see. I can do this. So, this is good. I can go like this, perhaps, so you guys can see a little bit what I'm doing. Yes. Oh, that's good. I'll go like this. So you can see we're trying to do this. So basically, we have the horizon line where the water, all of this is water, meets the mountain in the back. So this is the mountain in the back. And the horizon line in a landscape, when you're doing a landscape drawing or landscape painting, is always a good balance to have the horizon line be either 1/3 up or 1/3 down. In this case, it's about 1/3 up. So first I'm going to place this line, and because it's it's only in the middle, one might be tempted to only draw in the middle. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my line all the way from one end of the paper to the other end. And there's always a trick for everything. So because the end of my book is a straight line, I'm going to use this as my guide. To do this, I'm going to turn it this way. I know I want to do about 1/3 up. So I'm going to be approximately here. So I put my hand right here on the edge of my book, and I use this as my guide so I can do a straight line. Whew, pretty good. Can you see? Yes, you can see. Okay. So when I do my drawing in my book, in my sketchbook, I usually draw at first. I draw very faint lines so that I can easily erase or move them if I need to. But because I'm doing a demonstration, I want to make sure you see it on the camera. I'm making them dark. Okay, so that's my first line, this line represents where the water meets the mountain. Now I'm going to put another line, which is this one here, which represents the bottom of where this grouping of trees hits, meets the water. It also is the place where the water no longer has the wind on it, because in this section of the water, it has wind on the water, and that's why it creates a ripple effect on top. And this is why we can't see the reflection. And in this section, the water becomes a mirror. And so therefore, that's why we can see the reflection of everything that's behind there. Okay, so I'm going to do a line for this as well. So this is maybe an inch below the horizon line. So again, I'm going to put my book this way and use the book, the edge of the book as my guide to do a straight line. So I go like this. Now, one thing that's very dangerous when doing this is to get a paper cut. So you got to be extra careful if you're doing this. Luckily, I didn't get a paper cut. So now I have this line and this line. And my next step that I'm going to indicate the faraway mountain. So the faraway mountain, if you're beginner, you can just take all of this as one big mountain. You could. Or if you want, you can do two. So we're going to first indicate that this line here, the one where the mountain meets the sky. Now, when drawing this, it's important to have variation. So you don't want to do two little bumps that are equal. You don't want symmetry. You want a symmetry. So that's why this mountain is higher, and then it comes down. Then it just has a little straight line here at the end. So that gives an interesting design. And if you're outside in the woods and you are doing, a painting from life, and the mountain has two bumps that are equal, you can still break the symmetry. Nobody will know. And it will be a more interesting painting. So where does this start? It's about 1/3 down. So I know that maybe I'll make it a little higher than there. Why not? Maybe I'll put the top of the mountain here. So I can go like this. And then it comes down. And maybe it goes like this. And then it meets the other one. Like this. Now the other one comes down this way. This one has a slightly different angle, and it goes like this. So now this is my yellow trees. This is the mountain that's very far in the back. And now that I look at it, I find that this and this is equal in size. That makes it less interesting. So I'm gonna, immediately that I see this, I'm gonna make this a little higher. Always important when you're correcting something to do your first line first. You put a new line, then you erase the old line. So this is what I'm doing now. Okay. Now that I have my faraway mountain, my mountain, this is a grouping of trees that are yellow. I find that this here is not as interesting, so I'm going to go like this with this. Okay. Ooh. This will be interesting. Okay. Now I'm going to put the grouping of trees that is here. Now this grouping of trees, the base of it, is lined up with the lowest line, this one. So this grouping of trees is lined up, the base of it is lined up with this lowest line. And it comes to about 1/3 this way. So this would be considered about the middle of my painting, about this. So this is about 1/3 actually, 1/3 from the side. So 1/3 from the side, this is the middle, 1/3 would be about here. Maybe a little further in, a little less in, either way is good. The important is the base of this grouping of trees is on this lower line. And so I have drawing that is approximately like this, comes down here and then goes back up quite high. I can go like this. So now that I've put this, I know that I no longer need this line that's behind the trees, or this line, or this line. So I'm making this slightly different from this, which is fine. If you guys, I forgot to mention this, but if any of you would prefer to do a drawing from a photo that you have at home, by all means, feel free to do so. So now I'm realizing that this little interesting part of the land that comes forward, I didn't really do this, so now I'm doing this. There. Okay, so now I have this grouping of trees, which is slightly different from this. It looks a little odd, but that's okay. Trees are, in nature, trees have a funny way to decide if they're going to be odd looking or if they're going to be completely symmetric. That's why when you go and shop for a Christmas tree, there's all sorts of different shades there. All right. Let's talk about this grouping of trees here. So this grouping of trees, the base of it is between the two lines. So one can imagine there's water behind these trees and there's water in front. And in either case, the wind goes across like this, creating a ripple. In this portion, that's why we cannot see the reflection in front of this one. So when drawing this, one thing that's important is try to do a shape that differs from the original one that you have there. So it'll make it interesting. And the base of it is slightly, so it goes straight and then goes down a little bit. So you can do that. So you can bring it like very much to the middle. You can make it more to the side, or if you're more of a beginner, this is a portion that I would say just ignore this and don't include it in your painting. There's already enough lines here. All right, so I'm going to go like this and do this. So starting with the base goes straight and then it goes down a little bit like this. And so realize I made it very, very close in shape to this one, so maybe I'll vary. So I'm gonna do one that goes straight up like this, then down, then maybe a little one, maybe, and then I'll do one like this. There. So okay. Now I realize here I have two bumps that are very close. So maybe it's better if I break this symmetry and just go like this. Yes. Okay. So once you have done your drawing, when you want to start painting, there's always a chance to rearrange your lines or change your lines before you actually start your painting. Now, the more trees you put here, then the more you have to be careful when you're drawing your reflection. Now, to do a reflection, that looks right. You have to make sure that the top of the tree is lined up with the top of the tree in reflection. And same here. Now, this line here seems to be off a little bit. And why is that? Well, it's because there is some ripples that are happening here that are erasing this reflection. And here, what's interesting is that there is this portion where we don't see the reflection, this whole portion. So this is why the tip of it is not lined up with the tip of it here, because one could think that this is where the reflection goes. So even though we cannot see it, you have to imagine that it's there. If you have never done reflection, this is what I recommend that you try to do. Take some tracing paper and trace the object that you want to reflect. Then flip it over and trace it on your paper. This will give you the perfect reflection that will match your original object. So should I demonstrate that? I don't have any tracing paper close by. Okay, so what I do is I go like this and I say, okay, this is where my tip is. And so this is where this is. There we go. So now we have the reflection. Remember that the reflection will never be a very sharp kind of line around it because it's water. Water is always moving, even if it looks like a mirror. So there. So now we have this reflecting here, and I have to have this reflecting here. Best way to make this reflect here correctly is to draw it from here. Now this is further away from this section, so even though it's always the same height, it will not be as low in the water. The tip is lined up with this. This tip is lined up here. Here. So I'm going to go like this. Oh. See, now the height of this is not as high as this, so it should not go as high as this. I think this one is not quite low enough. Now this is lower than this, and therefore the reflection will be lower as well. Okay. Now I can erase this, and I think that this is not quite this low. Oh, maybe it's more like this. All right. Now that I've drawn this, including this portion, I can remove it, and I know that it's right. There. The only thing that remains now is those little pine trees here, that when drawing those pine trees here, make sure you draw them different sizes and not equally distanced. So there has to be a symmetry to make it interesting. So in this case, I'm going to go like this. This one, there's little friend right next to it. And then Big Mama, I'll put right here in the corner. Big Mama will go a little further down. So again, to do the reflection, go like this. And then this one, we'll just barely see it. This one like this. There. And this whole section is not for reflection. So there, that's how you do it. Okay, notice how I'm not even drawing this cloud, because what I will do to create this cloud is I will paint this whole sky blue, then I will dry my brush and remove some of the pigment from here while it's still wet. You could also do this using a paper towel, but I like to use my brush. Any questions on this demonstration? Okay, well, I have a question. Would anyone like me to do the more simple demonstration? Remember, if you want to talk, you have to unmute yourself.
I'm going to be brave and try it.
Without further demonstration? Okay, so this is the first step. And then
Yeah.
after you've done this, then you have to darken each section. But I want to give you a chance to complete at least this step before I move on to the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to go with what you're doing. I'm going to go for the challenge.
Okay, very good.
We'll see how it comes.
And now I'm going to talk a little bit about art supplies. Well, so most of you, if you have bought your watercolor paper, your watercolor paper came in a pad of paper. And each sheet, now I'm trying to find one sheet. Okay, this is a good example. So this, for example, would be a good pad of paper, and it comes in 12 sheets. Archer is a very good kind of paper for watercolor. And in most cases, you bought cold pressed. And cold press has a grain that is medium. And so, for example, you can't really see that. But in watercolor paper, there is cold press. There's also hot press, and there's also rough. So cold press is the one that is the most commonly used, and it has a little bit of a grain to it, a little bit of tooth, and in most cases, that's what we will use. Now, if you are a fine artist who is doing watercolor, who is doing watercolor, like for example, you're doing portraits, you might want to then buy hot pressed. So with hot pressed paper, so this is cold pressed, but if you buy hot pressed paper, the hot pressed paper will be very, very smooth. And less teeth will then make your watercolor painting less grainy. So when you're doing a portrait, for example, you don't necessarily want to show all the grain when you're doing the face. So watercolor artists who do portraits, oftentimes they will use hot pressed watercolor paper. So opposite from hot press, so you have hot press, that's the smoothest one. Then you have cold press, probably what you guys have bought, what I usually buy as well, which is the most commonly used. And then there is rough. Rough paper will have an even more grainy surface than cold press. And for someone who likes to do water, especially doing like the rough sea, or you'd like to show that the water has a ripple on it, using the rough paper will be very useful. It will allow you to have better results when painting marine scenes because it's got a nice texture to it, even more of a texture than a cold press. And so therefore, when using the dry brush, for example, or some people even paint with the palette knife. So then it does not completely cover the watercolor paper, leaving some white spots for the foam on the water. So especially if you have little tubes of paint like this, you can then put it on your palette and use the palette knife when it's still wet to then spread it on the paper. And if you have rough paper, then it will have some misses and that will reflect more like the foam on the water. All right, so that's for the paper. Is there any questions about the paper? One more thing then that I want to show you. So in most cases, you probably have bought like a pad of paper, and all of the paper is all like loose like this, and it's glued at the top so you can rip it easily. You can also buy something like this. This is what they call a block. So, and this is the brand Canson, but other brands will also offer you a block. So with a block of watercolor paper, the watercolor paper is glued on all sides. You can see it's black, it's glue. All of this, it's glued on all sides. Except in this case, there's a little opening here. This portion does not have a glue. So this is where I can insert a nail, or maybe I can insert like a scissor, or like in my case, a little palette knife, and I can rip it so I can break the glue like so with my watercolor, with my palette knife, and eventually I will be able to, so I can go all the way around like this, and eventually I will be able to take the painting away from the block.
Why? Why do they make it like that?
So when you buy a block, this is ready to paint on. Well, this is a painting that I did, but this is ready to paint on. You don't have to take the paper out of your pad of paper and then tape it all the way around on another surface. This is ready to paint on because it's taped, it's glued all the way around, so it won't, you know, it won't curl up. So this is why they do this. So I like to buy watercolor, you know, a block of paper like this, because when, you know, like underneath is just another piece of paper, watercolor paper. So once I have ripped this one from the block, then I'm ready to paint already. You know, I don't have to tape it. So usually it's a little easier. So I can just go like this and, you know, remove it from the pad. And voila. So now this is ready to paint on already. I don't have to tape it all the way around. And I can use a full sheet. I'm not losing a little edge all the way around. So this is another type of paper that you can buy. Thought I'd let you know that. All right, so brushes. I want to talk a little bit about the brushes. And I have a couple few here, like 3 that I want to show you. So a good watercolor brush, and I highly recommend that you buy good quality brush for watercolor, and with a good watercolor brush, like this one, for example, I can do everything. And a good watercolor brush will hold a lot of water, so therefore a lot of paint in it, and it will have a very fine tip once it's wet. So if I were to wet it, I'll just put it in this water here. Once the watercolor brush is wet, can you see, do you see this tip, how fine it is? So I can do very fine line with this. And I can also do very large, like a sky, because I have all of this. And once I put it in the water, it holds a lot of paint. So this is a very good brush. And if you are interested to know, I can just send you, I'll send you an email afterwards, and I'll tell you what brand this is. But this is one shape they have. They have all sorts of different shapes. So I like this shape. This,
Is there a way, like in a collection of brushes, which I have, that I can distinguish a watercolor brush from a acrylic or another type of brush?
yeah, there is a way. Sometimes it actually says on the brush that it's a watercolor brush, or that it's an acrylic brush, or that's an oil brush. So this is one way to know it. Another way to know it is to, if you know the brand, you can go to the website for this one brand and see if they have your brush on their website. And on their website, it will say if it's a watercolor brush or if it's a acrylic or oil brush. Now, if none of this is available, let's say that it's so old that you don't have the name anymore, then, you know, if you try the brush and you try to paint with watercolor and you cannot paint a whole sky without having to re-dip into your watercolor, then it's probably not a good brush for watercoloring. But a good brush, once it's, you know, once it's full of water, it, you know, it will hold a lot. And now I put this one in the water. If I were to go like this, you'll see how much water there is in it. All of this. I did a mess here, but anyway, and it's still completely wet. So I could paint a long time with this brush. But other than that, I'm not sure how to distinguish. Well, if I saw them live, I could tell you probably. Now, this is one shape for one watercolor brush. Another shape would be like a round brush. So a round brush, the middle part, this part is completely round. This one here is flat, and then it goes wider. So it's flat on one side and wider. So this is Filbert. This is another example of a round brush, but much smaller. Some people think that they need absolutely such a small brush to do fine lines, but you don't necessarily need it. I could do it with this. This other example of a watercolor brush has a fine tip, and it also holds a lot of water. So if I put it in the water, now you can see it holds a lot of water. Well, I can see. It's hard for you to see, but this is a John Singer Sargent brush, and it actually has a pencil on the other end. It's pretty cool. So, and with this brush, I have done very large paintings, and you know, I do everything with this. Now, another type of brush that I have here, I will show you, is this brush. It's called a mop. So this will hold a lot of water, and it's good to do like a sky, for example, to do this is not to do detailed work, but if you have a large watercolor paper and you want to do a large section of it, this is the item to use. So these are Zen, Royal, and Langnickel, but I'll send you the names afterwards. And one thing that I can tell you is if you have the number, like for example, this brush is a number 2. This is a Princeton Art and Brush Company. It's a round brush. It's a number 2. Well, in this brand, this is a number 2 round brush. But in this other brand here, this one, which is Royal and Langnickel, if we look for the round brush, it might not be a number 2, and the number 2 might be a different size. So each brand has their own numbering. So if you want to buy the same thing as your friend, for example, and you want to buy a number 2 because you like this size, well, make sure you buy the same brand. Otherwise, it might not be the same size. Any questions about brushes? I know I did not fully answer the question that was asked, but it's,
There, can I ask you?
yes?
This might be kindergarten level. So you can laugh at me now. I don't know if you can see that. It's like you put water in the thing. It's the brush. What's your thought on something like that? Is that just silly?
I don't think it's silly. I think anything is good to paint with. And with this, you would have to have your paint would be, you know, on your palette, and then
Yeah.
you can use this. I've never tried it, so I don't know how, you know, how it works. But it's worth a try. If you like it, and this instrument works for you, then it's your thing. The next person might not like it,
Right.
but if it works. Now, is the brush, show me again the brush.
Oops.
Brush, yeah. So
Like
if
it's a round one.
yeah, if the brush gives you a lot of water, it might work well,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know. I've never tried it.
We'll try it and see how it works.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so paints. I want to talk about the paints a little bit. This will be the last thing that I will talk about today. So in paints, there are different brands. And in watercolor, like with oil, like with acrylics, there are student level paints and there are professional level paints. What I have recommended for this class is something like this. So this is a little case. It's a Winsor Newton. And the little case opens up like this. Oops, sorry. Like this. And it has all the little panes with all the colors. Basically, for the class, you just need this red, this blue, and this yellow. Oops, sorry. This red, this blue, and this yellow, which is the alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, canyon, yellow, medium. But in this pane, you have all of these colors that when you buy it, you can see all the labels. So that's why I kept them and glued them to this little thing. So it has 2 greens, it has 2 blues, 2 greens, all of this of red, and even like this could be considered orange, 2 yellows, there's some browns, yellow ochre down here, and there's white and black. But for class, if you didn't buy this whole thing, that's okay. You don't need all of this, but some people like to have variation of colors. So this is good, and this is called pained color. And I like this when I go painting in plein air, because I open it, I have my little palette right here. And this actually, when I bought it, there's a little brush that goes here, and I can put my water right in this little container right here. It's not a lot of water, but it's enough to do a little outdoor painting. So this is Winsor Newton, and this would be considered like a student grade, although I love painting with this when I go outside. I have another little kit here. It comes in, it actually has 4 rings. I don't know where my other ring is anyway, but it opens up. This it acts as a little palette. I can put the water right here in the middle, and then use this to mix my colors. So in here, there's one ring, and I've used it a lot, that has yellow, red, and blue, plus black, white, and brown. I don't use the black. I never used that black, you can see. I don't use a whole lot of brown or white, but I use a lot of the blue, red, and yellow. So it has this ring. So if I don't want to have something that's too heavy, I can just use this and bring this ring, and I'm all set. But it also has a ring of red, so all sorts of different reds and yellow, ochre, and browns. And it also has a ring of blues and grays. And the other ring that I can't find is a ring of greens and one more yellow. So anyway, so that's a little kit that is convenient for traveling with, and it has a large variety of colors. Now, for this class, you might have bought, let's see, you could have bought little tubes of paint like this. So this is Coatman Winsor Newton. This Winsor Newton is also Coatman, but this is with painted colors. This is tube, so you open it up, you squeeze out a little bit, and then you mix it with water, and that gives you your paint. This offers a little bit more pigment than the paints. But these little tubes are student grade. And while they're student grade, they're very good quality student grade. I like using them very much. So Coatman Winsor Newton.
How do you spell Coatman? Oh, you're going to send it to us.
I'm sorry?
You're going to send us the list. How do you spell Coatman? That's a brand, right? You're saying?
It's Winsor Newton. Coatman Winsor Newton. I can send you photos of these, so you'll see the information. So these are some of the colors that I like using: Cadmium yellow, medium; cerulean blue; alizarin crimson. And when there's a little word like hue at the end, it means that the paint has been mixed with some filler. And so therefore, in a tube like this that says hue at the end, see, H-U-E, this one also has it. It means that it's more of a student grade, and there's less pigment in the tube than one that doesn't have the word hue. So when you buy them, these will be less expensive than one that doesn't have the word hue at the end. Now, I also have this brand that I like. It's called Daniel Smith Extra Fine Watercolor. And this is alizarin crimson, doesn't have the word hue at the end. So this has a lot of pigment in it. And this little tube, I think, cost me $20. If you're a beginner, you don't need to buy this very professional kind of brand. A little tube like this will probably last you 2 or 3 years. This is way sufficient. But I paint a lot, and I like to have a good quality brand. So I like the Daniel Smith Extra Fine. And this one also has all sorts of different colors. You can tell I have all of these. Now, I also have bought this ultramarine blue. This is also Winsor Newton, you can see. But this says right here at the bottom, and it's hard to see, but it says right here that it's a professional grade. So this one has a lot of pigment, and it says ultramarine, French ultramarine here, It doesn't say hue at the end. So this has a lot of pigment. So that's for the watercolor paint. Now, is there any questions about the paint? Okay, so I have one more thing that I want to tell you about the paint. And that is, let's see this one. Okay, this one. Wow. Okay, and that is that all colors are not the same. Meaning, some colors will be more transparent than others. Some colors will be more opaque than others. For example, if you're going to use the white, like in this little box, I have a white, and this white is Chinese white. Well, this Chinese white color is in an opaque color, this one here. And if you ever use cobalt blue is a pretty opaque color. And on some tubes, it's very easy to find out if it's transparent or opaque. For example, on this tube of Winsor Newton Professional, this is the French ultramarine color. If I look on the back of it, it has, do you see this little square? This indicates the lightness of the color. So if the little square is just the color of the tube, like, see the tube is silver, so the little square is kind of like an empty square. That means that this color is very transparent. If the little square were full, this would mean that the color is opaque. And on some color, it's half full, so it's a medium lightness. So that's a lot of information. You don't necessarily need to know all of this right now, but I thought I'd mention it. It's good to know, and maybe a year or 2 or 3 from now, when you're becoming more of an intermediate, you'll remember these things, and your new teacher will say, "We'll talk about that," and you'll say, "All right, I remember. Claire had mentioned something about that." Now, one more element that I'm going to mention about the watercolor paints is it's about the ability to stain the paper. Maybe I could show you. That would be a good idea. Yes. The ability to stain the paper. Okay. So this is a little watercolor that I did a while ago. And this is just a study, a graded wash that I did. Now, a color that has the ability, oops. I just needed this paper. So a paint that will stain the paper, it's good to, okay, start again. Understanding what colors you have, so what tubes will be staining colors versus non-staining color might be important. So for example, if I want to try and lift the color, so I'll go here like this. So I'm using a fairly dry brush, and then with a paper towel, I'm just going like this. Now you can tell that this color, it was possible to lift it. I'm going to try the same thing with the yellow. Not sure if it's so I just go like this. Okay. Now, the yellow has a little bit of a staining property to it, whereas the blue, I think, has less of a staining property. But this demonstration was not very well prepared. Maybe I'll talk about this a little bit more next time. But just to let you know that an artist who is a watercolorist doing portraits for them, it's very important to understand which tubes are staining versus which tubes are non-staining. Because when they're doing the portrait, if they're putting a brush stroke down that they're not happy with that, if they're only using the non-staining color, they can lift it from the paper and then start again. Whereas if it were a staining color, like for example, Viridian green, that's a staining color, it would never be used by a portrait artist who's doing the portrait in watercolor. All righty then. Any questions on any of that stuff? All right, so for tracing, first you trace it like this, right? This is just a little grouping of trees. Now, if you want to transfer this onto your watercolor paper, you have two choices. You could buy, it's called transfer paper, I think. It's like a carbon paper that you put under, and then you put it on top and you just trace. But what I recommend you do, I don't recommend you buy that, is once, okay, I'm gonna cut this so that it's not so big. Easier to do. Okay. So once I have this, okay, in order to be able to trace this onto another piece of paper, what you need to do is you need to reverse it and put lead on here with your pencil. Once you have done that, then you can reverse it and trace it. So I will show you. So this here, right now, I've only drawn or traced it, from my drawing. If I go onto the watercolor paper and I try to trace it like this, it's not going to show. But if I reverse it and I use my pencil to go like this on it, so I'm going to do this. So now this is the front. Now on the back, you can tell I went with my pencil here like this on the line. So now if I put it, I reverse it. This is the front. I put it on my paper. And I trace it onto the paper. Now, see?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So this will work, so first you trace it, then you reverse your paper. And when you reverse your paper and you trace on here, you have to make sure that it's a scrap paper underneath. Once you have done that, then you reverse it the right way, and then you put it on your watercolor paper and you can trace it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Got it.